Oh, I love this week. I think before when I was reading Heidegger the first time, my company was wonderful, but I think it was being made much more complicated. And I'm rather enjoying this perspective of being in time now. It's more aligned with kind of even my own life in terms of, you know, living with awareness or whatever. So I'm really quite enjoying this second time around.
You're getting that from Matt Kalarka's lectures,
Yeah,
helping?
yeah. I have to say that sometimes when people talk philosophy, and often I think it's unintentional, they actually will make it more complicated. And I will be really specific and say, talk to me like I'm grade 5, right? you know, really parse it down. And Matt, in a sense, does that. He makes it very conversational. He watches his use of language when he's presenting the ideas initially, so he's not using philosophy heavy terminology. I'm in the field of education, so I know it's the same kind of thing if I'm talking to parents, or when I used to be in K to 12, when I'm talking to parents, and if I'm starting to use terminology that's really specific to the trade, then you lose that connection with people.
Well, he uses terminology and the vocabulary words, but when he
Yeah.
does, he makes certain that you know what they mean. He
Yeah,
explains it
yeah.
every step of the way as you go
Make
as he goes
sure.
along.
Yeah.
He
He
kind
makes
of,
sure to drop an F-bomb once in a while so that
yeah,
you understand exactly what he means.
he does have flavorful, yeah, he does have flavorful language. But I mean, he uses sort of simple language and then we'll tie it to the terminology, but he's definitely focused on saying, hey, I want you to understand the essential points, the important points. Let's, I'm going to talk to you about it in a way like almost a layman's. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And yes, I was definitely making Heidegger more complicated. I was going outside the scope of what he intended, I think. Um,
This is an excellent series. If you want to learn Heidegger, this is the series to go through. And I'm the only one person on the planet who has these recordings. But Matt is an excellent explainer. I was very lucky to get hold of him. He's at
yeah.
Cal State Fullerton in California, and I took 5, I don't know, 6, 7, I don't know, classes with him, different
Oh,
subjects,
okay.
and I recorded every one of them. And if we wanted to, I could just keep going with all of these. I think there's 10 here in this particular series of Heidegger, and then we'll just keep going as far as I'm concerned. I mean, everything you wanted to cover, pretty much I got recordings of him giving lectures. So
Yeah, because I kind of was looking at a quick way to get in because, this is not my field. And I'm a global thinker, so I like to have an overview of things. And the way he presents is aligned with kind of what I need. So yeah, I'm with you. If
and
you want to keep going.
as I said, if you put, rank them, Heidegger's like probably in the top 5, top 7 of most difficult, probably in the top 3 of most difficult philosophers to read and understand. And the truth about Heidegger is, yeah, it's debatable whether you call him a continentalist, but a lot of people in the continentalist in philosophy departments do not like continentalist philosophers. They don't read them, and they and they teach them begrudgingly, reluctantly. But if they do teach them, they don't really get it. They don't really understand it, because if it's not analytical, they don't really understand it.
It's the evil devil that will lead you astray. Look what's happened to you. Continental philosophy. You start getting into that, you're getting into the dark, deep recesses of the human mind, you'll never come back. You'll end up like Lawnmower Man, permanently uploaded into the net.
Yeah. As Matt says, even other people in the philosophy department that he was in, and I can attest to that, did not understand, Heidegger, and they barely understand Nietzsche. They get the wrong ideas. So Matt is one of those few who actually understands it, actually gets it, and has the ability to explain it to receptive audience. And yeah, these are excellent.
I'd also recommend Herbert Dreyfus from Berkeley, and his lectures are available online as well. And he's got a book, Being in the World, excellent commentary on being in time.
Could you put that in the chat? Maybe.
I certainly will, yes.
If you ever go to like what is it called? Openculture.com. I think it's openculture.com. They have philosophy lectures from like, Harvard and Yale. I've gone to there occasionally. Depends on the lecturer entirely. And there used to be an audio series, I'm talking way back in the 90s, that was like a Berkeley series of lectures on Introduction to Philosophy. And I used to have the full tape collection of that. There we go. There's James. James C.
All right, Heidegger.
Really,
Heidegger was a
great.
boozy beggar who could think you under the table. Oh well, can't beat him.
There you go, Herbert Dreyfus. Okay, I will keep that in mind. Yeah. So this week, more on the theme, but I think this stuff is difficult. You gotta take a while before you get your way into it. So the main draw here, of course, is that we listened to the lecture, and we did that. Yeah, the idea that the culture, to reiterate, again, here we go. To reiterate, the culture, society, civilization that we're in is giving us a limited, one-dimensional, usually based on capitalism, but it's a bunch of different ideologies. As Kenneth Smith would point out, we're under the regime of at least three main ones: Christianity, capitalism, and science. But what these ideologies do is that they reduce our human experience to this one-dimensional experience of simply toolifying everything and causing it to, be valued only insofar as it can profit us, and only insofar as we can do something with it. And of course, there's so much more wealth and richness to the world and to the cosmos and to the human experience than that. So how do we get out of that? Well, first of all, the first thing we have to do is step outside of that. We have to get outside of, the maelstrom, the storm that we're in. First of all, be able to step outside to be objective about it. And that's a difficult task, certainly. Heidegger's method is, of course, to get us into what he calls Denken space. We have to do that by, he wants us to do that by asking the question, what does it mean to be? What is being? And we talked about, it seems like an absurd question, but it's an absurd question to most people deliberately, on purpose. He wants us to think differently than our ordinary everyday way of thinking by presenting us with what seems like a ridiculous, absurd question. We're getting out of our everyday way of thinking and getting into a Denken space of questioning and contemplating and regarding differently and seeing through a new perspective the world and the cosmos and our place in it. The first thing he's going to regard as to what are things that be are us ourselves, human beings. So, you would say, we already know what a human being is. I am one. I know. So, this is going to be a waste of time. But what he's saying is, of course, let me roll back up here. He's not going to give us that task of analyzing what a human being is to figure out, like an anthropologist, okay, or a zoologist studying a species. If you're studying an anteater, how do anteaters work? How do they mate? What do they do? What are their nature? That sort of thing. That's not the project here. We're not trying to figure out what human nature is. We're not going to get an answer to that, but we're just going to see if we can see differently and think differently and see through a different reality tunnel, see through a different pair of glasses, figure out if there a different approach that we're usually taking to our daily everyday existence, and get into that Denken space. Because if we do get into that Denken space of seeing things, the world differently, from there, and only from there, can we then move on and radically reconceive, reconfigure our way of thinking, way of living, way of world or society and way of existence. And that's ultimately the goal here, is to reconceive government and religion and all of our institutions, figure out a new way of thinking about it. And he's trying to get us to that place. I mean, we can't do it just straight on. We have to take the side way. We have to take the winding view. You know, that's one thing, like Sean and I were talking about. You know, why do you use all of these complicated? Well, that's on purpose, you know, because only by doing that can you get into a different way of thinking about it. Okay, so you heard all this. Is just a reiteration. You heard Matt talk about all this. Let's get some reactions from some people.
You know that thinking space is that's not like Descartes' idea of right thinking, right? That's different from that, right? He has, because Heidegger seems to have like two ways of approaching the world, through readiness at hand or presence at hand, right?
That's
those
exactly
are two, right? Is there another way that you're referring to?
Yeah.
Is there a third way?
You're right. Yeah.
He's referring to a third way, which is Dasein. So in Dasein is the being in the world, and the being for the sake of which it itself is in the world. So that's the third way. It's not that it excludes. It's not that sign doesn't exclude readiness to hand. It doesn't exclude presence, but it's a unique conception of being, which is different from the relevance that from average relevance. And he creates another classification here called total relevance, which is the aggregation of relevance of all beings to Dasein, which is the part of the composition of the worldliness of the world, which is his definition of the structure of the world. So there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack, but it's basically an ontological investigation that has never been done before. And it's completely obliterated by the Cartesian model of mind and body as being the composition of consciousness or composition of the world.
Yeah, so that would
It's an affront. Heidegger's whole philosophy is an affront to Cartesianism, in other words.
Yeah, so that would be the difference between, just ordinary base matter of, tables and buildings would be, and us would be, we're being, the objects that we use in the base matter in the world is being at hand, something that we could make into a tool. We have projects, we have meaningful context, we have a stake in how we're used. As Matt said, you don't want to, if we do instrumentalize and utilize other human beings, if we're not consenting to it, we'll push back. But whereas our equipment will not, our computers and our refrigerators, so that we are being in the world, being in the context in which we live, right?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh yeah, Matt talks about the how our projects are you know, commonly a product of our culture, right? And we do not, you know, decide what projects really, it's already been decided for us. So, right, how do you,
Yeah.
it's Heidegger is proposing how do we get out of that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, from being a product of our culture, of our, you know, of our manipulative culture that, you know, confines us to a certain projects that we're trapped in, right?
A very limited, very narrow, I like to call it a bonsai version of what humans could be. Humans could have the potentiality to be this magnificent experience of the world, but instead our culture, dominated as it is by Christianity, capitalism, and science, it has reduced us to this experience of a very limited viewpoint of what's potential, what's possible, and what our purpose and what our meaning is. And yeah, Heidegger definitely wants to break that and move us in. And, you know, most philosophers do, actually. They want to revolutionize how we're living, how we're experiencing the world. Yeah.
Heidegger has a way of talking about it here. Dasein has been referred to as an in order to, in terms of an explicitly or inexplicitly grasped potentiality for being. That's the able to do projects that you're talking about, for the sake of which it is, which can be authentic or inauthentic. So in other words, he's kind of like laying the groundwork here for those discussions of basically authentic being and inauthentic being, and the role of Dasein in selecting its forward path, or comportment, as Heidegger calls it.
Authenticity was so very difficult. It's like water. I was having a lot of trouble when we were studying Merleau-Ponty and people like that. You know, it's like it slips through your fingers. You're never quite sure where to get it. I think I got a better grasp on it now. You know, if you take it from less from a scientific view, or even an artistic view, or even an ethical view, but if you take it more from a psychological view, which took me a long time before I got that, largely because philosophy and psychology have very little to do with each other, to their detriment. I think that's a project for the next 70 years. I think if you know where we're trying to merge these two, which there's a lot of reluctance to, but I think they would enrich each other if they did. But that would be a huge project. But I think there's an unwarranted amount of antagonism between those two. But I think taking it from a psychological view, I think authenticity, at least how it was taught by Merleau-Ponty and Heidegger, is a lot more comprehensible. It took me a while before I figured that out. I want to go to Terry. He's had his hand out for a while. Terry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to mention, because somebody was talking about the culture we're born in. And if I remember right, in Heidegger, that's what he calls facticity. So we're all born with basically with limitations. Obviously, we're born with whatever economic circumstances we're in. We're born with our culture. So I think that's kind of his concept of that's what he calls facticity. And because we all have constraints, right? And so that sort of we have freedom, but it's limited quite a bit by our facticity. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Heidegger's main, I think, at least for this section, main idea is, you know, how do we encounter, you know, things, or specifically other beings, other humans, you know, we encounter things not as individual objects, yeah, but as equipment that conforms to our projects, to our meaningful context. So that would be, yeah, ready at hand. Is that what we said? Yeah, ready at hand. The title of this session of the networks of equipment. That's the phrase. You know, these configurations of equipment that operates according to our concerns, interests. I think what Heidegger would suggest is a much healthier, much more authentic way of approaching the world would be to encounter things as themselves, as their essence, as they are. Not as we conceive them, contextualized within our projects. Well, because when we're doing that, we're obscuring our ability to encounter and engage with the world as it is, as it exists, as it presents itself to us. And that would be a much healthier, much more sane, much more useful, much more efficient, effective way of approaching the world.
Could you give an example of something that you think would be worthy of at least attempting to unconceal from all of this readiness to hand that we get caught up into, and instead experience it, or at least try to experience it to some extent of what you would call the thing in itself?
Well, I mean, I think I could think of like certain ideas that I have in mind that may not be have anything to do with what we're talking about with Heidegger. But I think when you're in a different state of mind, whatever that might be, perhaps an inebriated state, a different meditative state, a state of hypnosis, a state of a trance of some sort, a state of when what they call a jogger's high. When you do a lot of strenuous athletic activity, you get into a different mental space. I felt that before, or you're in a dreaming state. Some state other than your everyday, normal, waking, quotidian state that you're always in. Something other than that. Then you're perceiving differently. You're perceiving the world differently. So when you're in a state of meditation, you can see things that are very, very perceive the world in a very different way. So that would be an example. But I think closer, those are my examples. I think closer to Heidegger's approach is what he's trying to do, is trying to get us to a different state. He doesn't put it like that. I'm putting it like that. He would say, when you get into Denken space, by pursuing things like asking the question, what does it mean to be? Asking the question, all these questions that he's covering, how do we interact with all these things? What that does, what that project will do, if you do it correctly, is it will put you into Denken space, and you will be able to then perceive differently. You'll be in that different state of mind. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? And once you're in there, you can then operate. Yeah.
Can I weigh in on this?
Yeah, go
ahead. You're talking about Kant, did you say?
No, I don't think
Tristan, were you talking about Kant?
No, I don't think I mentioned Kant.
No, we were talking about the benefits of going into the state of Denken, or breaking away from the readiness to hand.
Oh, I thought you said the thing in itself. Okay, so well, anyway, basically, where for Kant, the kind of like mystical endgame was the thing in itself. I thought I heard you say that. For Heidegger, it's relevance. In other words, readiness to hand has to do with how the totality of relevance is brought into the world of Dasein. So everything has a with which and a towards which and a forness of itself, and that's that constitutes its readiness at hand. But it also has a for the sake of, and that's for the sake of Dasein, and that for the sake of is the totality of relevance that the world has, which is exclusive to Dasein and Dasein's understanding, which is what you call Denken, David, but I think that's getting a little esoteric to only have a German word for something that means thinking. he says understand. The translation of a lot of his references is to Dasein is understanding. This is the peculiarity that Dasein has.
Yeah.
So so the thing is in itself is a little less interesting in an ontological scope. In an ontological scope, you're interested in the already existing understanding and the potentialities of things as they relate to other things. And the way things relate to Dasein is through relevance. Is it relevant or not? The hammer is extremely relevant because the hammer builds the house, and the house becomes, in a way, the totality of relevance for the hammer and the paintbrush, and the totality of relevance for Dasein is all the tools in the tool shed.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea is to tweak the way we think, to get to a completely different way of thinking, because our ordinary way of thinking isn't going to cut the mustard. We're not going to get to where we need to get to. We need to be able to approach from a completely different vantage point. Yeah, the Denken space. And Heidegger is using the methods of inquiry and approaching reality from these different ways different ways to triangulate on our subject, and by doing that, we're going to be able to be outside of the context, step outside, and then from there we can operate on it. Like a finger can't touch itself, and an eye can't see itself. A patient can't operate on itself. You have to be outside. If you're the subject, you can't operate on it. You have to objectify the situation before you're able to do anything with it. All right, Audrey, you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I actually was looking while I was reading for a how-to from Heidegger, which he doesn't do. He doesn't seem to give, how to get there. He just says that's really important to get there, and but does show us some ways, which I'm trying to think if that was part of a lecture or something that I actually read in the text. I was looking for it as you were speaking, where he's talking about something about the hammer. If the hammer breaks, it sort of throws us off kilter. And if it throws you off kilter, you have that gap where you're outside of the world, you're on the edges, or at least that's how I interpret that. And basically it's what you were saying before, David, where, when you're meditating, you could work with your mind in such a way that you can get outside and look in and see how things are. That doesn't mean you don't want to be part of the relevant world, but you can see it in a different way. And your choices would be basically different if you can widen the gap from that unknown, or however you get it. If you don't get it through Eastern philosophy and your meditation cushion, then maybe you can get it when the rug is pulled from under you. And so give yourself that space, that moment of, instead of being totally freaked out and trying to close that gap, sit with it a minute and see if you can widen it and see certain structures in that world that you're a part of, and see if you can see things a different way. And I think somewhere in the text, he talks about if enough people do that, you can actually change things. And I'm pretty sure that's why he got involved in the Nazi movement. You can go either way with it, but, you're looking for a way to change the way people think and see the world. And you can make mistakes doing that, but,
Yeah.
So David, isn't he engaged in, or Schlossenheit in what he's doing right here? world disclosure. So he wants to open up.
What that means. World disclosure.
So the challenge and the reason that Heidegger is so difficult is he's disclosing a world to us that we don't have the distinctions to understand. And so he has to introduce it in distinctions that we already have in the world of reference that we already have. And in doing so, opens up a new world of distinctions and operational possibilities for us. So he talks explicitly about that, but my realization is that's what he's doing right here.
That's the benefit of using ontology. You know, like if you use ontology, you're going to find distinctions like he's trying to find, like involvement and the side-by-sideness, how things are dedicated for the sake of. So the ontological relations are what he's trying to disclose in this section. He's disclosing all the ontological relations of worldliness.
And I
So that's the benefit, I think, of this section of the book. There's a lot of other sections of the book. There's a lot of I was going to say something to Audrey, you know, about all the clues he kind of lays out, you know, like authenticity and thrownness and so forth. But that's essentially the ontology is the new investigation into the ontical reality of relations between things and the world.
And underneath it all, there's a background unsettledness that the world isn't what it could be, and that this is the opening for us to have the ability to make the world what it could be, and it's not right now.
Well, I don't really completely disagree with that, and there is something to world building beyond just building a house. But he's trying to get down to the nuts and bolts. And I see him very interested in the nuts and bolts of things. And he's open to anyone sort of building on top of that. He's open to people creating new ontological investigations because he knows that and says that he doesn't investigate all of ontology. He doesn't expose the entire nature of Das Sein. He has a lot of question marks. You know, he leaves a lot of question marks. So I think what he does say is it's really up to other people to actually create. If the world is going to be recreated, it will be recreated through other people. But he doesn't say you have to agree with me, or that because I'm laying out ontology of Das Sein and his relation, you know, and his relations to things at hand, that this is going to solve the problems of the world. He doesn't say that. There may be something in this relationship between this and Nazism, but you know, it's not very strong. It's more like this is a kind of like an invitation to become an individualist in a way, but it's also a new method of analysis which hasn't been tried before, and that's what I think is really revolutionary about it. Not the pointing to a better world or anything like that. It is pointing to more analysis, more than anything else. It's the pointing to more ontological analysis, basically a declaration that a primordial ontological analysis is a very positive forward path for investigators. That it's a fruitful path for investigation. So if there's a claim, that's the claim. The claim is that a primordial ontological investigation is a good forward path for investigation of Dasein and Dasein's relationship with the world. And that's kind of like the first half of the book, is trying to lay that out.
Okay.
My understanding.
I don't think there's like a big message, you know, like if you join the Nazi party, because of course it has nothing to do with Nazism, because Mein Kampf had hardly come out, you know, when he wrote this. This was written before Hitler went to jail. So it's, you know, it's not like nothing, not related to that at all directly.
Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, my understanding is that the missing second part of Being in Time is the guide that was referred to in a large sense, because as I understand it, he intended in the second part to tear down history of philosophy using a temporal ontology, which he introduces in Being in Time, and to, from that, discover, show a path to the discovery of the meaning of being. And unfortunately, that was never completed for whatever reason. So we're missing a large part of the solution here. We're pointed out the problem and we get a hint at where to go, but it's not finished, at least as far as I can see. I guess it's up for us to finish it.
I don't myself, I don't feel that's necessarily true. I read that. There's a book by a very small book. It's about 100 pages on Heidegger. That was the only one I could find when I was looking for one that says that makes that claim. And I don't think that the last section of Being in Time, you know, being about temporality, is a failure, in the sense that that particular critic was, or Heideggerian perhaps, but was talking about. I see Heidegger being somewhat successful, even though it's a very flawed, there's a couple of very flawed sections of the book where he's comparing different contemporary philosophers, preceding philosophers. He's comparing different philosophers on their theories of time. And he's laying down, but he also lays down a lot of facts about temporality that I believe are relevant and true to the ontological analysis. So they're relevant, they're ontological, it's an ontological analysis of time. And it's I think he's very successful in doing that, and also in putting his own stamp on it. So I think he's a little overly, I forget the word, but overly obedient to previous philosophers that he had enjoyed studying. But he's not, he's actually, I think, accomplishes quite a lot with his, with his distinctions of temporality. And I think they fill in a lot of the gaps in the strictly ontological explanations that are in the first part of the book. So, so I think that part is very successful. The understanding of time as dynamic, as being and being related to being, and having a forwardness about it, and so forth. I don't remember all the distinctions right now, but there's a lot of them, and so I think he was, to me, he was extremely successful, and he lays out a kind of a coherent understanding of how being already exists in the world, already understands the world, and then has a forwardness to his character, which he calls the horizon. So the even in the around the middle of the book, he starts introducing the idea of the horizon, and the horizon is this timeness of facticity in the future. And it's very, I think it's a very valuable concept. So I don't mean to set up an argument, but that to me, that's not the most controversial thing about his philosophy. That, you know, the idea that he was a failure in terms of temporality, no. I think there's a really good, rich explanation of temporality here. And if somebody wants to do further exploration of temporality, that's available. There's a lot of philosophy of time, a lot of understanding of, deep understanding of temporality that can be investigated. So I think it's, the idea is that Heidegger, to me, Heidegger is extremely open-ended. If you want to specialize in timeness, go for it. That's a rich field. There's modern modern physicists that have written books on time. Some of them are really, really interesting.
Well, certainly, if you ask me, we need a very different way of interacting with the world. I mean, the world as we utilize it now is just, you know, we cut down the forests to, make our phone books, and we could use a good deal more collaboration with the natural world. I mean, we don't have to, be entirely blinded by the good things that in industry and science and technology has done for us, certainly, but we're completely out of balance. This is what Nietzsche was talking about. We're overly over in the Apollonian and viewpoint, and we need to embrace a good deal more Dionysian energy, I think.
I agree. I agree. I think he's actually, I do think that he's giving us ways to look at the world in a different way so we can act individually differently, like one person at a time kind of thing, and make changes. I think this book is about, well, I didn't finish it, but I'm from what I've read in the short essays that I have of his, that he wants to change the world, and that he's giving us some way to think about how to do that in a more genuine way than just, grasping at what we have within the world. I mean, I think it was Matt who was talking about grasping in the, is that true? Right,
Well,
you're talking about we keep grasping all these different projects because they're there. So it doesn't mean that somebody chose them for us. There's a whole bunch of things, and we're grasping to the ones that we want to work with, but they're already there. Somebody already thought about it first. So everything we're doing is either grasping for what's already there or reacting against what's already there, but it's based on what's already there.
Yeah. And so the way I'm understanding it is, you're born into a context, and we talked about this in the very first class. The one track you're set upon, like the car ride in Disneyland. You think you're steering the car, but you're on the track. You're on the track. Right. I mean, you go to the cereal aisle, or it's always, or all these different choices, but they're all cereal, or
right.
There's hundreds of thousands of millions and trillions of ways to play checkers, but it's still going to be checkers.
Right.
You're locked into the program, into the system, and that reduces authenticity. You're going to have to come out of that in some way.
Yeah, the clue, I think, is the term "for the sake of which." Are you doing this for the sake of the world, or are you doing for the sake of design? In other words, do you have a design such that your action is contributing to the success of your project? So that's the ultimate test for Heidegger. You have a project. Are you really contributing to the success of the project? And that would be for the sake of, that would be the correct kind of grasping. When you grasp towards the house you're trying to build, that could very well be an authentic gesture.
Yeah.
But or it could be inauthentic. It
You know,
could just be the drudgery of working for a corporation building houses.
Yeah, inevitably this does get into the way. And I think Matt said this, that ultimately all philosophers in their way, they do want to transform the way we live, the way we,
Right.
but you know, it's an open question. You know, they all do disagree about the details about what that, you know, that great, you know, majesty, that glory is going to look like and going to consist of. But they all want to move us into that higher state of being, into a higher state of consciousness. And inevitably we start asking the question, okay, what would that look like? What are the details? Give me the blueprint. And that's the problem. You know, as Matt said, you know, anytime you hear a philosopher say, I have the solution, yeah, run. That's never going to get you anywhere.
Right.
Philosophers and solutions are very poor matches. they can diagnose the problems, but
well, at best, Heidegger gives us some tools to become observers of being, and to start the inquiry into how do we invent something. But yeah, he's not prescribing what that new world would be. Absolutely.
Yeah. But that inevitably comes up whenever we're talking, you know, class over meetup after meetup of I've been going through that. Inevitably, somebody comes up. Okay, so what's the solution? What would it look like? Well, you know, and
you can't. Right.
I'm going to. I think the way Zoom works is if I close off my video, you can see my avatar. Is that correct? If I'm talking, does everybody see my avatar? And the reason I put this avatar up there is because this is from Spiral Dynamics, and what it is a ranking of value systems. And I say, if we're going to look towards anything, I'm not going to give a full presentation of it, but if what they call second tier value memes are, I think, a good target that we could conceivably put as where we're headed. You know, the world is a single dynamic organism with its own collective mind. Self is both distinct and a blended part of a larger compassionate whole. Everything connects to everything else in ecological alignments. Energy and information permeate the Earth's total environment. Holistic, intuitive thinking and cooperative actions are expected. Life is a kaleidoscope of natural hierarchies, systems, and forms. And the magnificence of existence is valued over material possessions. Flexibility, spontaneity, functionality have the highest priority. Differences can be integrated into interdependent natural flows, and the understanding that chaos and change are natural. Now imagine a world where 20% of the civilization, of the population, think at this level. Imagine 10% of the population, you know, the people you meet at the mall are at this level. You know, that would be a radically different civilization. Yes? No?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I definitely think you're right. But I also think that a lot of this is a lot of Eastern thought put into a Western context. And I mean, it doesn't matter, but what I'm saying is that I think that maybe more than 10% actually do think like this. I think the 10% you're talking about are Western civilization and definitely this country, that it would really make a difference. But the biggest obstacle to this, and it's not Heidegger, because I mean, Heidegger's difficult, but I mean, I haven't read a philosopher that isn't difficult. I mean, I'm doing a class on Derrida, and I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I need like 5 different people to tell me like what one sentence means.
Heidegger is easy compared to Derrida.
Yeah, well, okay, and the same
Heidegger's
with
piece of cake.
and the same with Deleuze. So, but they're in the same vein in terms of getting us to try and see the world in a different way. They're not telling us how the world should be. They're saying you be authentic to it. And if your authenticity spreads and you see the world as it is right now, and love it and understand its structures and know why you're doing something and you're totally authentic with it, they probably wouldn't complain about it. You know, they would see it as authentic. The whole idea is to get you to see things. That's what even social, what do you call it? Literary criticism is about. Know where the author's coming from before you start making, saying this is about this and this is about that and you should be this way. I think what Heidegger is doing and Derrida and Deleuze is they're giving you, in a Western sense, they're not giving you the answers. They want you to work with your mind in such a way to investigate and then make your decisions and then act. And it's how those acts go. I don't think anybody's telling you, even the postmodernists, they're not telling you what to do. They're not giving you the shoulds.
There's always
yeah,
like Kant, yeah.
Yeah.
There's always a limit to what a philosopher can kind of do. I think Kant is a good example of someone who tried to do more than anyone else in drawing a distinction about morality and ethics that no one else had drawn before. But with these other philosophers like Heidegger, they're basically, to a certain extent, the projects are limited. They're limited by the fact that a philosopher can't really be a scientist.
Right.
A philosopher can't be the expert in physics. You could try to have an expert in physics. There was one. There was a French philosopher who tried to be an expert on all of knowledge, Comte, and then another. Usually Frenchmen try to do that. There's Comte, and there was an American mathematician, Peirce, and there was a Bergson was a philosopher who started out as a mathematician and tried to be a master of all science. Yeah. So that there are philosophers who kind of bite that off, but most good philosophers, I hate to say, most great philosophers don't necessarily try to do that. With David, I wanted to just say, contest that chart. I wasn't able to read the chart word for word because it was so small, but I listened to your words carefully. And to me, it's a spiritualist kind of narrative about the world. It's not anything like Heidegger's ontological approach to the world. It's a completely different explanation of what the components of the world could be and thinking about that. So I just kind of disagree with that approach. That to me is if you will, a spiritualist or integral or something like that. Some kind of other could be Eastern philosophy, And Heidegger doesn't reference a lot of Eastern philosophy. So I think it's a mistake when we take one philosopher and we try to tie everything, we say this is like the Buddha, and we try to tie ideas back to some source that we already know about so that we don't have to do as much work.
I don't think that's fair, James, because I think it's linked.
I think that's what it is. I think it's like a tendency to try to refer back. So referring back to Eastern philosophy, referring back to, it's okay to make those analogies, but to sort of say this is just like the thing in itself, or this is just like to unpack it in terms of previous understanding, because that won't, all I'm saying right here is that definitely won't work with Heidegger. Heidegger is a completely different way of looking at the world. It's not like Eastern religion. It's not like Western religion, which is where a lot of our spiritualism comes from. And it's not like, it's not even like Hegelianism that much. It's not like German idealism. It's a completely new or novel approach. So that's all I'm saying is philosophy can be novel. And here we have novel philosophy. Let's not sort of saddle it down with, you know, the previous philosophers, or he reminds me of Aristotle so much, which is probably true in my case. So, you know, you got to kind of like just limit that and listen to exactly what he's saying. Listen to what a philosopher is saying. Go ahead, Audrey. I'm sorry.
I definitely don't agree with that. I think that there's very few total original thinkers. I think everything is built upon something. And I think that's why you need the ancients, and you need to study and look into at least some of the, you know, the classical philosophers, because people are either going opposite of that, or they're taking it to a new level. And to think that somebody just came into the world with their totally own ideas, as if we don't relate to one another, and our history is just something that you'd have to really knock me out and then try and get me to subliminally believe that. I don't.
Yeah, I admit it. Yeah, I admitted that. I think Aristotle is relevant, that Heidegger built a lot of his ideas on Aristotle to a certain extent. And his expertise in Greek philosophy, you can draw some equivalencies and some relationships in the history of philosophy, but they're not really strong. Like if you wanted to say that he was a Hegelian,
No,
you have a difficult time.
I don't think people here are saying that, though. I think people here are bringing up other people, other philosophers, because it relates to, or it's totally different than. But I don't think that's the point of this at all. I mean, reading this or trying to figure it out. I
think it's okay to talk about philosophers, especially philosophers since Heidegger. I think that's really relevant. You brought up some French philosophers that are probably very important.
Yeah, and Heidegger has influenced all of them. And he's influenced a lot of the postmodern philosophers, and he's considered, and as well as, but he's also, he and the postmodernists also, who don't, by the way, call themselves postmodernists, that's our definition of them, they're building or talking about, or in reaction to the ancients and or Kant and that milieu. I don't even think it matters. I mean, I'm not sure where I'm going with this argument. It's so I can easily just drop it. But I'm just saying that I think that I just finished reading The Sociology of Philosophy. And if you read that, which is a very long 900-page book, and it goes in from Eastern to Western, from the ancients all the way up until right before Nietzsche, or maybe even Nietzsche. Lots of research on, you know, who gets published, or who became important, why they became important, where the ideas came from. A lot of things merged, you know, because of Pyrrho going into the East, and these things are in the air at certain times. There's a particular way of looking at the world, and philosophers follow that, and they're working on a particular section of something because it's that time. I just see the connectivity of that, and I guess I overreacted to you saying that, so I apologize if we took.
And I'll give you an equal explanation, Audrey, because I think you deserve full explanation. I'm actually involved in a project where I'm trying to expose the wrong equivalencies and the wrong, not so much the equivalencies, but the misleading statements that have been made by philosophers in history. I don't think it's a positive story. I disagree with the idea that philosophy is a positive transition all through history building up the ideas of man towards a truthful explanation of the universe or any part of it. I think there were a lot of severe mistakes made, and the mistakes were carried forward for centuries in some
Right, I
cases.
never used the word positive. I'm just telling,
Yeah,
never part of that. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I haven't read that book. Who was the author? Do you know?
Collins.
Collins?
Yeah.
No.
Sociology. I mean, if I can figure out how to send a PDF, I'd send it to you. I have a PDF of it because the book is just ridiculous. I can't even hold it. But if anybody's interested, but let's not take too much time away from Heidegger on this.
But didn't Heidegger write a book about the Greek thinking? And so he goes back and seems to idealize that period of
Oh, he
time.
totally, yeah. I don't know if idealizes is the right word, but.
Right, but he felt that that's where, you know, those guys, Heraclitus and Parmenides, are the ones who
Heraclitus
really understood, really understood what being it was, and and he seems to have
a perception with the original thought, because I don't see that here necessarily. I just see this as a building up. But
well,
anyway,
yeah.
I'm going to mute myself so I don't.
Well, so I wanted to ask again, back to the the readiness at hand and the presence at hand. I get the impression that he's saying that one is more authentic than the other, right? For Dasein, and that if you're in the world and you are relating to the world with the readiness in hand, you're more in tune with the being, with the true being for Dasein. Whereas the presence at hand is more of a theoretical, you know, observatory position of relating to the world, where you're not really, you're standing back from the world, and you're not involved in using the equipment of the world, you know, in a project. Is that true? Is there kind of like a distinction there in terms of authenticity and inauthenticity?
There's a word he uses for the difference.
Yeah.
Is there really a claim?
I'm just going to say there's a word he uses for the difference.
Yeah.
Is there really a claim that one being is better, or because that's not my interpretation at all. It's that he's just observing the phenomenology that.
Yes, right. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. I don't know. I'm hearing a lot of like shoulds from, from what I've read with Heidegger, I'm not seeing a lot of shoulds. You know, I mean, he talks about authenticity and inauthenticity, but it is a lot more, to me, it's just descriptive and phenomenological.
Yeah.
To me, he's coming from that point of view, generally with his approach, and not saying we should do that. It's not as much normative that's just what I've read.
I mean, we're glorifying thinking, and thinking is very expensive. It's like brutally expensive. Yeah. Most of the time, we're better off in a flow state where we're just acting, we're engaged in whatever we're engaged in, and we're happy, and life's beautiful. And sometimes you need to think, and it's expensive.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, that I just wanted to say there was I agree with Terry. You know, should is not good. It's not so hot. And as for the question, the difference between presence at hand and readiness to hand is relevance. The ready things that are ready to hand have a relevance for Dasein. So that's and the relevance is very, he explains that it's very complex. It has a forness and a withness and a to-ness and a for the sake of. So there's a lot of distinctions that you can give readiness at hand that don't necessarily apply to things that are present. So the Dasein has a kind of a field of view that, so you might call this flow, Warren, but once again, that, you know, just be very careful about taking your current state of mind and relating it to the difference between authenticity and inauthenticity. In other words, as Heidegger is putting it, so that you just be careful that you're not ruling out part of Heidegger's philosophy that you didn't mean to miss on purpose. So that maybe Heidegger is talking about flow state, but he's talking about the relevance and the total relevance of things at hand, and our understanding of things. And our understanding of things comes into play when things become part of our world. And the world isn't just everything in it, but the world is the totality of relevance.
Right. So there's a time when he talks about when your involvement with the world, right, is disrupted. Does that mean that you're when that happens, you're in a state of presence in hand?
Well, it could be, yeah, but I actually forget the text on that, so I don't know what he said.
Both of those states phenomenological ways of viewing being?
Well, there's. I don't think he's talking about being becoming present at hand, or being transitioning from Dasein to mere presence at hand. He may. I'm not going to rule that out, but I'm more on the side of Dasein is always responsible for its comportment in the world, and the only question is whether things breaking apart, you know, the things losing their relation, is going to cause Dasein is I think to Heidegger, it's a normal part of inauthentic life. In other words, if we basically live inauthentically, there is a kind of like a high tendency for things to fall apart, for being to kind of fall apart.
Sure.
Those relations fall apart. We don't know where to buy a hammer anymore. We can't go out because of COVID-19, maybe, you know, like we have a lot of things that might seem to break down, and the breakdowns are going to happen. So you've got to view these things in a totality. And usually part of the solution to when things break down is becoming familiar once again, refreshing your relationship to the totality. That's usually a good formula for finding your way back from one of these big breakdowns you're talking about.
I see. So maybe, so inauthenticity would be like taking on projects that are really not for Dasein, right? But for the, right?
Well, I don't know if I would say that he has a specific prescription that you should do in order, other than ask the question of what does it mean to be? By that pursuit of line of inquiry, that in and of itself gets you to where you need to get to be able to operate on you know, all the objects and all your projects and all yourself, your authenticity.
Right. Yeah. I think Matt, you know, was talking about that, you know, that you're doing things, you know, involved in projects that not for your own interests, but for some other cultural interests or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, David, I think there's a possibility that some of your projects can be wrong. Some of your projects can be, for the sake of someone who is not you. So there is that possibility that you're actually living an inauthentic life and
Right.
hiding yourself inside the skin of someone else.
Exactly right.
And most people aren't aware of that. I mean, that's not to say that you can't actually have a meaningful life and existence. The problem is when most people are doing it unconsciously. They're just following the track. They didn't choose it. They're not consciously making that choice of devoting themselves to another person or a group or a nation. They're just following the track. They're not.
In that case, but David, when you say in that case, someone else must be making the choice, or something else must be making the choice.
If you're born into the context, yeah, you're set upon that track, and very few people are conscious enough and aware enough and capable of breaking out of that and being able to. Yeah, so in that sense, yeah, it's not a choice that you.
So it's a question of identity. We may not have our actual identity.
Yeah.
So that would be a case of where you're not really in touch with your, Dasein, your true sense of being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What does it mean to be?
Right.
Meaning of being. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And answering that question, yeah, opens up a panoply of possibility. So I keep wondering if it's actually important or interesting to go through the three categories that he outlines: conspicuous, obtrusive, and obstinate. Or do we need to? Is that going to be helpful, useful? Mm-hmm.
3 categories of being?
That would be helpful.
Right.
Well, we talked a little bit about being at hand and presence at hand and Dasein, but go ahead and add anything new that we need to
find where
embrace.
Oh, it's there. Here we go. Yeah, I don't know where I am. Okay. If everybody remembers reading this, and I'm gonna see if I can. There we go. It's still too small. Here we go. Yeah, I mean, we don't come here to be read to. I know the problem. This is supposed to be a discussion group. But let's see how quickly we can do this. Yeah. In each of these cases, equipment is here ready to hand. We discover its unusability, however, not by looking at it and establishing its properties, but rather by the circumscription.
How can he
Yeah, Audrey, go ahead.
How can I get it?
What?
That wasn't me.
Okay, somebody's feedbacking or something. Anyway, yeah, just quickly, when its usability is thus discovered, equipment becomes conspicuous. This conspicuousness presents the ready-to-hand equipment as in a certain unreadiness to hand, but this implies that what cannot be used just lies there. It shows itself as an equipmental thing, which looks so-and-so, and which, in its readiness to hand, as looking that way, has constantly been present at hand. Pure presence at hand announces itself in such equipment, but only to withdraw to the readiness of hand of something with which one concerns itself, that is to say, of the sort of thing we find when we put it back into repair. Okay. All right. In our concernful dealings, however, we not only come up against unusable things within what is ready to hand already, we also find things which are missing, which not only are not handy, but are not to hand at all. Again, to miss something in this way amounts to coming across something unready to hand. When we notice what is unready to hand, that which is ready to hand enters the mode of obtrusiveness. The more urgently we need what is missing, the more authentically it is encountered in its unreadiness to hand. All the more obtrusive does that which is ready to hand become. So much so, indeed, that it seems to lose its character of readiness to hand. It reveals itself as something just present to hand and no more, which cannot be budged without the thing that is missing. And then finally, in our dealings with the world of our concern, the unready to hand can be encountered not only in the sense of that which is usable or simply missing, but as simply unready to hand, which is not missing at all and not usable, but which stands in the way of our concern. I'll say that again, but which stands in the way of our concern. Wow, okay. That to which our concern refuses to turn, that for which it has no time, is something unready to hand in the matter of what does not belong here, of what has not as yet been attended to. Anything which is unready to hand in this way is disturbing to us and enables us to see the obstinacy of that with which we must concern ourselves in the first instance before we do anything else. With this obstinacy, the presence at hand of the ready to hand makes itself known in a new way of being, as the being of that which still lies before us and calls for our attending to it. And what Matt had here is this explanation. Yeah, what happens when your concerns, when meaningful contexts get interrupted, things become conspicuous when I need them for a project, they're not useful, a broken tool. They're obtrusive when we need them and can't find them, when they aren't ready to hand. And they're obstinate when they demand to be addressed, but they don't fit our first priority projects. Answer the phone. Yeah. Yeah. So these are the ways in which our world is interrupted, and they help us. And what happens when that happens is we're starting to question, we're starting to reconceive, reconfigure, recontextualize, reperceive objects and our place in the world and their place in the world and our relationship to them. And I will stop sharing now.
So this is actually the aspect of Heidegger that's meant the most and contributed most to my life. I studied it 35 years ago as a basis for computer user interface, computer experience design with a phenomenological basis. And what we can see now is the companies that are getting this right are winning vast fortunes, and companies that don't get this right are disappearing. It's he just nailed it on the head.
I think that's actually a pretty good, useful tool that you could use in your projects. Yeah, if you're a computer programmer or anything, yeah, just figure out what this nature of the objects that you're using is all about, and then utilize an appropriate, efficacious method that you can utilize to use in a way to manipulate them, in a way to operate with them, as opposed to just doing it randomly and scattershot.
Well, and anticipate the concerns that the person's going to have in the moment that they're going to have it, and have the affordance that they need available right there and then in that moment, but not cluttering up their interface at other times. So yeah, it's the phenomenological observer is absolutely essential to good design.
To use more of the new age vocabulary that will annoy James Cook. It's being mindful of what you got and what's happening and what's arising externally. And
I'm all in favor. Yeah, no, I'm all in favor of that. I think that's cool. We definitely have to use our own vocabularies. I think one of the things he's talking about here is the mechanism of the breakdown that Jim or someone was referring to earlier. The mechanism of the breakdown is in this separation from the ready to hand from itself. Basically the transition of the burial of the relationship between das Sein and what is ready to hand. That's the kind of part of the mechanism of a breakdown that describes a breakdown. It's not necessarily the cause of the breakdown, but it is I think a description of the breakdown. There's a lot of causes, and I think that becomes clear later in the book when you review the structure of care. So that sort of gives you a much better handle on what the complexity, the full complexity, and the discovery or understanding of being.
Personally, I'm all for disruption. I'm all for breaking the mode, and because then you can open up possibilities. Yeah, we got a number.
You can turn it into a series of positives. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, a series of things that become positive.
Yeah, Shauna, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's what I was kind of getting at last week when I was talking about getting outside of the box, and so it's that idea of care and what is relevant to us, and that's what gets our attention, and that's how we understand things. And so, how can you step outside of that to, and Heidegger is putting out the call to have this deeper reflection, but how is it not circular in many ways? And I think Audrey last week also said, well, it's really just the questioning. And today she mentions he doesn't really give a prescription, for how to deal with this. And so, just more again, the idea that just asking the question is what's fundamental to him. But I do see the fact that we're in the box. What was Matt saying? To get to the edge. I think he used the term to get to the edge, basically to sort of look at our situation from the edges. And I would say, yeah, okay, from the edges, but we're still not out of the, we're still in there, we're within the box, viewing the box. So I see I appreciate his intent of that we need to stop and think. And I definitely was seeking more from him, sometimes reading into what he was saying more, but it's that the very fact that what is relevant to us and our sort of our care of the world is a limitation to do that deep thinking, or see, as how does Matt say it? We need to see. Anyway.
Yeah. Not do you see it, but do you see it? Yeah, right. Yes. Exactly. Well, a lot of people wanting to chime in. Let's go with Will.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to. Well, first of all, I'm really happy that somebody brought up computer programming, right? Because when I think about information theory and computer programming, in terms of Heidegger, the amount of similarities are everywhere. I mean, computer programming is all about dissecting things into their component parts, forming relationships between them, and then turning it into a functional system that can be worked with. And throughout the entire process, you're constantly questioning what tools you're using, why you're using them, and then reforming them into something that's more specific or more general. I mean, the amount of computer paradigms that exist just to fill that gap are a direct representation of the readiness at hand of those specific systems, right? You have functional systems that only deal with the tiniest component parts of something and then reduce it just to a series of graphs and seams across those graphs. And you have object types, right, that only form relationships between two or more different things, right? But it's a constantly evolving system that a programmer has to always think about. And it's that process that I can't stop thinking about whenever I read a new line of Heidegger. So if there are any computer programmers in here, I would really like to hear your thoughts on Heidegger in terms of programming.
Well, I can give you a couple ideas there. So one thing is there's the semantic web. So I encourage you to look into that. It's been very well thought out. One divergence from Heidegger is don't expect that they can make everything explicit, because if I was to say what Heidegger would say is you're never going to elucidate that entire background of understanding, which is also one of the pitfalls for AI. The main impact I've seen has been for user experience around his explanations of tools breakdowns and that sort of thing. Yeah.
A lot of people to get through. Yeah, well, I'm going to try my best to get through everybody. Jim, your turn.
Oh yeah. So, you know, I get the impression that Heidegger is, you know, bringing us back to trying to get us back into the real world of that Heraclitus, you know, describe as the world that's constantly in flux and ever changing, and that in order to understand it or find our being in it, we have to see it, you know, look at it, investigate it phenomenologically. Yeah. And that's his difference between ready at hand and presence at hand is that kind of, you know, his criticism of the whole history of Western philosophy since, you know, Plato, is that we try to look at things from a transcendent, you know, subjective, objective point of view, instead of being involved in the world of you know, the Heraclitus is described, and you know, experiencing his notion of readiness at hand, where the world is part of, you know, the world is part of you. The world is part of your Dasein. The being is in the world that you treat as equipment, as readiness at hand, and it's an extension of yourself. It's not subject object. And I think that's what you're referring to when we say we have a tendency to thingify, to see things, entities in the world as things that are separate from you, right? Yeah. And so I'm just trying to understand what he means by that. And I think that's might be connected to what he means by authenticity. And you're kind of like, if you look at things in, you know, the world in a subjective, objective, you know, that kind of, you know, since Plato and then Descartes have described the self as somehow split between the subject and the object, right? And he's trying to mend that split by saying, well, if you're involved yourself in the world as a Dasein, you see the world as readiness at hand, and it's an extension of yourself. It's not there's no delineation between yourself and the world. But when you're looking at it as a presence at hand, then you see it as an object outside of yourself.
Those are wonderful questions. I'm going to go with James Cook. What do you respond to that?
Well, I think looking at things objectively is kind of like basically is not really where you want to go. You don't want to see the world as an object, and you definitely don't want to see Dasein as objectively. So I think that would be a mistake to try to get out of the limitations of being inside, being in the world.
Right.
Being in the world is already inside of something, so he shouldn't have to worry about not objectifying himself enough. Mm-hmm. Although the inner world, and Heidegger actually has a word for the totality of relations. He calls it the worldliness of the world. In other words, once we're inside our relations, all of our relations, then we really truly have a path to the world, which is the totality of relations, the totality of relevance, the worldliness of the world. And this is where the readiness to hand comes in.
Right.
Yeah, for the first time.
Right.
So I forget the other comment. It was Will about programming. I am a computer programmer. So yo hablo C++. So the
oh yes.
or me,
yes. Go on.
So what has always struck me is the fact that when you do classes, you know, it's you already have an idea of ontology. You already do ontology. So this should be a cinch, you know, because I already do ontology. but the question is, do you do ontology as well as Heidegger does ontology in section
16 that we read?
15. I would look at 15 in the original book. So I would, which was abridged in the reading, but 15 is where he does the full ontology of readiness to hand. So and a lot of that is abridged in the other book.
Textbooks have to be.
Yeah. So that's a very good example of how deep Heidegger goes into ontology. So that's all I'd say is that yes, if you're a programmer, you already probably have a good idea of what doing ontology is, and its benefits. And then the next step is to actually learn from Heidegger's ontology, because it's not the ontology of a computer program, but it's the ontology of being in the world. So, which you can't do with a computer program. No one can write a computer program that big, which is like a joke. You know, these guys that talk about general artificial intelligence, it's a joke. Nobody can write a program to do general artificial intelligence. They can only maybe try to drive a spaceship or a car or something like that, you know, if they're really good at it.
Don't tell everybody that. We're trying to keep that a secret.
Are they?
So the stumbling block is context. And if you see AI, it's been laughable because it gets context wrong. But now they're building knowledge graphs of unimaginable size, and it's actually getting reasonably good. It's not, it's not perfect, still makes stupid mistakes. But the reason it's getting good is it's building up that background of understanding as a knowledge graph with a formal language from the World Wide Web Consortium, where you can invent ontologies and build things of unimaginable scale.
So that's the semantic web you were referring to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can say anything you want, and you can apply formal logic to it, and it's decidable. So you can ask very complicated questions and get answers.
And being that this is 2020, I would be surprised if Heidegger wasn't in there somewhere.
Right. Yeah. I think, well, so the thing with context, right, is that there are several ways that's been a known problem, right? At least since 2010, when that paper from Toronto came out on memory-based neural networks, and then the work that was done on attention-based neural networks, and just recently since GPT-3, with they just shoved as much data as they possibly could into it. I mean, that's definitely been something that people have been working on, but I was much more so talking about, right, like classes and how they're derived into subclasses and relationships, and specifically polymorphism, but also, I mean, just templated functions. I mean, as somebody who has been writing C++ for 9 years, I mean, the way that templates took the community by storm was just possibly the biggest development in C++ since it was just C with classes. I mean, the way that you can just write a type-free environment that's only constrained by its relationships, right, and its input and its output, is it makes the information in it only subject to the processes, right? It's much less about the thing and much more about the act, right? How is this act going to transform my data? And can that be done reasonably in this type system, right? Versus, can this be done on a type at all, right? And that's a little bit maybe too specific, but if you want to talk about hammers and nails, and I mean, that's a pretty direct relationship, you know.
So with the semantic web, you can invent whatever relationships you have, and people already have. So you've got the relational schema that does classes and inheritance and all that, but they also have simplified knowledge organization, where you can say this thing is a broader concept than that. So literally, you can say anything you want to say. You can invent your own ontology and reason over it with formal logic.
Okay, I'm gonna want to try to get some more people here. Stephen, did you have more to say?
Yeah. I was just going to ask a couple of questions. And first question is, obviously being in time is very much about what would be defined as a method. This is a way of doing things. For example, the two great methods in our world are science and religion or mysticism. So it seems to me that Heidegger is pointing towards the mystical direction rather than the scientific as a method. The other question I'll have is, what do you think Heidegger's primary world conception is?
Well, yeah, we were talking about that just a few minutes ago, weren't we? Yeah, the impression that I get isn't that he's saying the world is one way or another. This is the way. I don't get that impression. I think he's trying to say that he's trying to get us to a point where we can appreciate that there's a panoply, there's a multiplicity of options that we're not even seeing, that we're ignoring. They're not even on the menu right now. And he's trying to get us to a space where we can embrace the greater potentiality of different ways of perceiving the world and interacting with the world and constructing a civilization. I don't get the impression that he's trying to say this is the way all existence is, but just that what we've got now is a small reduced version of that potential that could be that humans could be in a greater, more magnificent, more grandeur, richer, wealthier version. And there's no one that is correct. It's just that we need to start thinking about other potentialities, other possibilities.
Okay, let's go in the other direction. And so somebody said he is not Descartes. He is not Descartes. We don't know what Heidegger is. We do know that he's not Descartes. Now, Descartes was, a rationalist. So what we do know is Heidegger's world conception is not that of the rationalists.
I think I'm going to go with James Cook on that one.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. In getting out of the box of objectivity, he's basically saying that our view of being has to be self-referential. So I think that's the answer to your first question, Stephen, is that Heidegger's advice to us.
I'll say phenomenalism. Would his worldview be that of phenomenalism?
I disagree, because there were a lot of other philosophers that attempted to base their, he's not the only philosopher that used phenomenology as a basis for his research. The basis for the research, it's true, is phenomenal, but
no, phenomenalism's not quite the same thing as phenomenology.
Okay, what is phenomenalism, Stephen?
Well, phenomenalism's oh God, it's look at the classic. Did I find a classic definition there? Right, no, there it is. So phenomenalism, the doctrine that human knowledge is confined to or founded on the realities or appearances presented to the senses.
No, that's not the same as phenomenology. Phenomenology is about the sum total of the appearances and doesn't necessarily imply any judgment made by the philosopher. Although each of these philosophers that called themselves phenomenologists had different opinions about being and different opinions about being and objects in the world and so forth. I think that what I said is basically Heidegger's advice. Heidegger's advice is that any analysis of this sign going forward needs to be self-referential. And if it's not self-referential, then it doesn't necessarily hold water with Heidegger. And the that's kind of like, if he has a kind of like a sticky advice, that would be it. And that we don't have to view anything at all, not even ourselves, with objectivity. It's a question of like doing the homework and finding out what are the relationships in the world. That's the ontical world. That what are the relationships that were important to the Greeks, the ontical relationships that should be important to us in our time. And of course, Will's comments were a good example of that. You know, what is important in our time? Is it, you know, is it neural networks? Is it object-oriented programming? Is it being able to abstract processes from data? You know,
you're a universalist, James.
Whatever matters. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You've committed the sin of universalism again.
Yeah. Whatever matters to you is going to be the beginning of your search for meaning.
Okay, so in short terms, how would you describe his method? Oh, sorry, what's his, primarily, what is his method? In a Nietzschean nutshell.
No, he's not really confined to a Nietzschean nutshell, but that's good. No, it's what I said before. It's the primordial ontological analysis. In other words, don't just look at thing as it appears, the purely phenomenological entity, and don't try to second guess the thing in itself, which was Kant's method, but just put yourself in a ontological, systematic analysis, which is not based only in the present, but has.
So sorry, are we going for a meditative mood or an analysis?
Not an analysis, definitely.
So that's science. So his path was to reject transcendentalism, mysticism, and all the above, and go strictly down the conformist path of science. I find that hard to believe.
No,
well, I wouldn't say that it was conformist at all, and that the path of science is only conformist.
His method is analytical. Primary method is analytical. Yeah. I find that hard to believe.
No, it's analytical in character, but it's analytical based on a primordial ontological investigation of the world. And so I'm not trying to mince words with you, Stephen. I'm just simply saying that analysis is something we do, you know, that is part of our trying to understand.
I know that, but what is he saying? What is he saying to be different?
He's not saying anything to be different. The only thing that he's saying to be different is that being in time bears further analysis, and that it basically has been frozen in time. That the idea of being and the idea of time has been frozen in time ever since Aristotle. That's his major claim, you know, is that this is something that's been muck. We're stuck in the muck. We don't have any idea about the nature of being, and we need to reinvestigate this.
No, that's very useful. I like that. Aristotle. Well,
it's on
the blacklist. Burn his books. Okay, I'm happy now.
It's ontology.
Half of them were burnt, as a matter of fact, Stephen.
Yeah, it's ontology.
And it wasn't your fault, Stephen.
Wasn't his big?
I'll make it my fault.
His big move.
I'll be like Bugs Bunny, who was dissatisfied with merely having $2 on his head. Bugs Bunny worked it up to $1 million eventually.
Okay, Warren.
His big move was to reintroduce meaning as a first-class citizen. So Descartes threw that out. He said, let's be objective about everything. You know, take people's concerns out of it. And he said, no, not that that's not a valid thing to do sometimes, but that's not generally what people are involved in. And if you limit yourself to that, you're cutting yourself off from the richness of the world.
Okay, Shauna's had her hand up for a long time. Shauna, your turn.
Sorry, no, that I was trying to think. Oh, yes, okay. I was trying to think. It's been a while. What was I going to say? We've gone a little bit away from what I was going to touch on, and that was just the idea of, you know, I guess a little bit of how-to with Heidegger. And I was curious about this. I mean, people were talking about sort of the perspective of the computer programmers, but from a management perspective, for people to get outside of their realm of care, generally I found, you know, very oversimplified here. It's because they either A, are in crisis, and so then they're forced to come up with solutions that are perhaps outside of their, you know, they seek out, or heavy, you know, a very strong desire for something. People trying to get somewhere, achieve something. So driven by crisis or desire. In fact, precipitated crisis was often used as a way to encourage people to make some shifts or change in organizations. So I'm trying to recall my first reading if Heidegger does actually capture any of those things that would compel people to move into that, you know, because why else would a person sort of do that aha moment or take a step out unless there's a reason to get outside of that, nor, you know, their day-to-day, everyday routine. So I'm just sort of throwing that out there.
I think that's an important move that an executive can do or a consultant can do in the company. Sometimes the right thing to do is to precipitate a breakdown, because otherwise things are just going to kind of muddle along however they've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a thing called the 6 conditions needed for change. I mean, first you have to have the potential to change, but also you have to have dissonance. Dissonance is one of them. You have to have that conflict. You have to have something that is uncomfortable, something that's poking at you. Because if you don't have that, then you're not going to be able to change. You're not going to be able to. You're not going to want to make waves out of the bubble you're in. You're not going to question anything. So yeah, something has to be poking at you for you to start.
There could be a problem, I guess, if it gets, you know, like a backfire, if it gets perceived by the team as manipulation. So if it doesn't look authentic. So if it's, in other words, if it's an inauthentic crisis, that could be a definite bummer. The analysis that the consciousness of the people on the team could change because of crisis is probably correct. But there would have to be some kind of a way to make it come across as authentic. If it always comes across as inauthentic, or inauthentic at the lowest level and maybe authentic at higher levels, then that could cause weaknesses in the organizational structure, in my opinion, because I did work in some large organizations in my career, and I can see where those kinds of backfires and organizational problems begin to take root in inauthenticity itself. That's, I think, a source of a lot of organizational problems. So I don't mean to argue with that idea. I just think that it's very highly dependent on the perception of the team members and the entire organization.
It starts with trust, and you have to establish that mood in the organization. And Heidegger says a lot about that too.
Messy process. It's never going to be clean. You know, it's always a bunch of fuzz, and well, that's the world itself, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, Jim, you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, is that me? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, what are the so are there different modes of being that Heidegger's talk about, or is there one being over time, and is that being a transcendent being, or is it an immanent being?
Well, if you introduce time to it, I can't imagine that it stays the same. It stays static. It's going to change naturally by just the process of time.
Exactly right.
Yeah, James Cook.
Yeah, it's definitely not static, and I would call it transcendent. So, and it's the two main possibilities are inauthentic and authentic. In other words, you kind of have to read the book to find out what he means by authentic being.
I would point out we have 7 more classes to go.
Oh, that's great. We're going to get it. Yeah. So that's basically the limitation, is that we can become dynamic and transcendent and so on and so forth, but that has a lot to do with our vision. So that's my word, vision. Heidegger would call it foresight or foreseeing. So this capacity we have to see things that aren't really there. It's not just seeing ghosts and things like that. We can actually see future entities that don't currently exist, and these future entities can be imagined out of our totality of relevance. So it's that relationship we have with the world that creates the possibility of transcendence.
Yeah, so when you say transcendent, is it transcendent meaning outside this world or outside of existence, or?
No, I just call it two different modes of existence, like you first said. You said modes of existence. And I think if there's modes of existence for Dasein, it's the inauthentic mode, where we're actually being for something. And then there's the authentic being, where we're fully being for the sake of ourselves. And that being for the sake of ourselves can be a fully authentic mode of being, in which we might be doing some of the same things that we used to do, but we're doing them with a new purpose and commitment, because we basically fit that into an integrated whole, which is authentic Dasein.
Sure, because when you say transcendent, that could imply a kind of a dualism, right, between the, a subject and something outside the subject, right?
I'm not sure of that. I certainly don't mean it that way. I mean that the inauthenticity, authenticity is definitely an antinomy. If I may use that word here, I apologize, but it's definitely an antinomy of sorts for Heidegger. It could be like, if you want to put it in Kantian terms, it would be inauthenticity, I don't care, authenticity or something like that. Or flatland, flatland might be in the middle somewhere. But the idea is that you are willing to put your world at stake in order to make a transition of being. And being we're talking about is one being. It's Dasein. Sure. So it's not mystical at all in that sense.
So it's not outside time and space.
Yeah, and it's not switching subjectivity for objectivity or any such thing.
Right. So it's a being within time, in space.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and we're not launching. We're not a part of the Mars mission yet, but maybe some of us are.
Okay. Yeah.
So from a non-mystical standpoint, we know that there's, well, if we're not Randian, if we're not Ayn Rand, we know that there's a world that goes on after us, and we have a concern for what do we leave after us. And so it's just a concern. What are you going to do about that?
Right. But he does have an idea, this notion of a horizon, right? Horizon referring to death, right? So time is a finite time. And so being is a finite being within this time and within the horizon. Would that be true? It's not nothing that, it's not a being beyond death, right?
Well, as far as I can tell, there are going to be people here after I'm gone. And I do have some concern for what world I'll leave. And hopefully I leave it a little better than it was when I showed up.
Yeah, Warren, I think I agree with that. I think you can set the horizon wherever you want to. So you can have a horizon which is death, but which he discusses. But you can also have an horizon as to the life of your children, part of the life of your descendants. So you can take your descendants as possibly being as important or more important than yourself. So I would, it's up to you, where you set your horizons. It's a part of your authenticity, or maybe part of your inauthenticity. Maybe people have told you that the only thing that matters to you is that you become a published something, publish books, publish music, become a rock star, and that becomes the meaning of your life. And then you end up killing yourself on alcohol or drugs because of it. It's like it's really the story of your own authenticity or inauthenticity, where you set your horizons. And Heidegger is reminding us, that we do have authentic and inauthentic horizons in front of us all the time. So it's not just one horizon, it's all the horizons that you set for yourself. If I publish a book, it's probably going to be by accident. And, I'm ashamed of that, but that's okay. But it's not my idea of the only horizon I have. And being unto death is a very good horizon to use to find out what horizons are actually the most at stake for you as the sign.
Sure.
Yeah.
So is there kind of a presence or a moment that Heidegger talks about within this horizon?
Good question.
I mean,
The present moment. I'm trying to think if it's that it's part of the timeline, and everything that happens in the future that you are fully in control of, because you're not in control of anything that happened in the past. But you do have like a degree of control over things that are yet to happen in the future. So I would say that it's part of that timeline that's your kind of like operational area. And you can also say that's part of what he calls your horizon. So that horizon line and everything below it, is kind of like availability. In a way, it becomes readiness at hand. So that's the big breakthrough here, I think, is that the readiness at hand is not just equipment, but it's also that availability of things, the readiness at hand in the future.
Sure. Right.
That's unforetold.
Mm-hmm.
And Will, you said something in your post about code being presence at hand. Well, for somebody else, your code is going to be readiness at hand. So it's not just necessarily limited in that respect. It's like these actors that say, I never watch my own films. I always avoid watching my own films. You know, a few of them say that. It's probably not true. But the idea that something that is a subjective effort for yourself is only an objective effort for other people. It should never be an objective effort in your own being.
Right.
And I respect that attitude, but maybe that's sort of what we're getting at here, is that the work of design is never done and it's never defined. It's always a potentiality.
Right, right. So the authentic, to be authentic in existence is never for the moment, but it always includes the future, right? Maybe influenced by the past and the future, right?
Yeah, the past, the way I look at it is the past is gray matter. I respect the past, and it's gray matter too. It's not just the past, but I need to, most of my concerns need to stay focused on things that are ready to hand in the future. I can't just deal with the past 24/7. You know, maybe 1 week. I could take a 1 week vacation and deal with the past. But you know, like if you have a family member that dies, you're going to be like in that past. That's a good time to deal with the past because you're kind of like part of that. Your basically design is all about for that 1 week that you've got to be executor or kind of execute the will and so forth, or go to the wake and the funeral and all that. That's all dealing with the past. Partly dealing with the future, but you know, it's all back a visit to the past.
All right, thank you.
Well, that doesn't relate to anything, but a long time ago when we were talking about Heraclitus, it doesn't relate to anything we were just talking about right now. But I did want to point out that one of the things my teacher told me, and this wasn't a lecture, he actually told me that if you want to find what he called Heraclitus a tuning fork. You know how a tuning fork works, so you know you're in perfect pitch. Heraclitus, ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, is a tuning fork for all of the continental thinkers, Marx, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche. I have always remembered that. Yeah, they're all drawing on the themes that Heraclitus was hammering on. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, I think that, yeah, they start merging. I'm not entirely sure Heidegger falls in the same category, but I'm starting to see more and more that he does, from what I'm able to tell.
You know the reason for that, David? It's because Heraclitus actually traveled every year up and down the peninsula. So he lived on a peninsula, I forget what it's called, but he would actually walk the peninsula every year, meeting people all along the peninsula and discussing things with them. And that's how he said he developed his ideas, is talking to other people. So that's the, he's kind of like the rock that philosophy stands on in that sense.
Absolutely, he is. Yeah, yeah. No, he's a fascinating.
And people, and people are the rock that we stand on. It's like James Joyce, the dead. You know, the dead are like snowflakes that cover all of the earth, and every one of us comes down and takes the place on top of the other snowflakes.
Yeah, if you use him as
Exactly what I was saying before, James. In a different way.
Okay, Audrey, what do you mean?
That when you're saying that we're on the backs of the dead and that they're snowflakes, I mean, that's basically we're building upon things as well. We're not just remembering them.
It's like Faulkner says, the past is never dead. It's not even past.
I'm not sure that I understand that as much as, I mean, I do think the past is the past and that we're in the present remembering the past, that we're never, that the past is only a memory, and that we're always in the present, and our future is based on the future that we think about is based on our memories and our present.
Yeah, that's kind of a computational perspective on it. I think a Heideggerian perspective is we're a summation of our history, and biology going back maybe 300 million years.
Well,
and we're the sum.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. I can't argue it. I don't know how I understand it, but it resonates somehow.
Yeah, James.
I think that's one aspect. It's one aspect of our being, is that we have a past, that we have a history. But it's only part, one component of what describes who we are. Absolutely. We also have the part of history that we are determining, which is the present discourse. We have the understanding that we have of the world, the Denken, the ongoing thinking about things, the reference to other beings, which Heraclitus excelled in. And to a certain extent, we can say that's true of Aristotle as well. So we all sort of like partake in this giving and taking from the world, and then the other part of structure is our, which is essential, is our fallenness. So the fact that we're not actually able to right every ship in every circumstance, our vulnerability to a world which we are not ourselves it, we are not it, we are us. So the fact that we participate in the world with a kind of a separation of the borderline of being. We have a borderline. So that borderline of being separates us from the world and in a sense from all these things. And one of the things that Heidegger is actually asking us to do is to not be dependent on our images of history and our images of the past, because those are only a component of our being.
Right.
To put those in their place. Gray matter, like I was talking about before. There's the past, which you can't change at all. And then there's the gray matter, which you might have some control of. But the ultimate objective is things that are ontical, things that are at least real, at least in real time.
James, the biggest aspect of that I see is what we can do now, in particularly in language. So John L. Austin wrote a book, how to do things with words. So you can, and that's the thread of continental philosophy after Heidegger, was mainly around the analytics of language and such. So we can make commitments. We can do things with words. We can take action in the present.
I didn't say you couldn't take action in the present. The present is, of course, the place where all action does take place.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it happens at any other time. So to me, a lot of analytical philosophy is redundant because it says things that are truisms. But I have to read the book a little bit, I have to skim the book to sort of like decide whether I agree with your assessment or not. I'll give it to you. Austin, the meaning of words or writing?
How to do things with words.
How to do things with words, yeah.
Yeah.
So sure, it's a great idea, and but there is I would just argue, with that idea that you can do anything with that is not in the present. We can't do anything that's not in the present.
Yeah,
That's the
clear.
ontological reality of our lives.
Clear.
I just started well, I didn't just start. I'm rereading Object-Oriented Ontology, A New Theory of Everything. Have anybody ever read Graham Harman?
No, but interesting.
Well, do you know Triple O? I mean, have you heard of Triple O?
Nope.
God, there's only 9 people left. How does this happen? We start out with 17. That people just drop out? Interesting. Anyway, I'm reading that, and I started to read Heidegger only after the first time I read Triple O, which is Object-Oriented Ontology. I'm trying to figure, oh, there I am. I was looking for myself. That is the book. And I finished, after I read that, I read Timothy Morton's Hyperobjects. And then I got interested in Heidegger, which is interesting because they're not related, but they're different takes about how to look at something from the edges of the world. And they're very modern, of course, and or postmodern, I guess, which is interesting to think of the term postmodern when I'm still alive. I mean, to me, I'm in the modern, you know what I mean? But anyway, I find them interesting. If you guys if you have time, they're short, relatively short books compared to, Timothy Morton's a little more difficult to read than Graham Harman, but it's a very interesting concept, and it's very postmodern in its day, I mean, in its way, I mean. But guys, I don't know, like I said last time, I can't go past, it's way past, well, it's not way past, it's only 9:15, but I want to go.
Yeah, well, 2 hours, 15 minutes is enough, I guess.
But thank you all, it's been a pleasure.
Sure, Audrey, always good to
I
have
always
you.
learn stuff from all of you, so thank you.
Always good to have you here. I do want to point out that I did do a postmodernism class with Matt, and I do have those recordings as well.
Oh, really? So I'd be interested in who you studied.
Yeah. The thing is, every class I took with Matt, I got an A, with one exception. The postmodern class, I got a B. That's how difficult postmodernism is. That should tell you something right there.
Well, I think if you're including the French guys, they're really, Heidegger is difficult to read.
It's hard stuff.
Like Derrida and Foucault. But if you read the sociology of philosophy, you'll get a sense. It doesn't go into the postmodern because it's way too, I don't think it goes past the 40s. I'm trying to remember if Heidegger's in there. I think he might be, but he might be at the end of it because they have to do all this research before they can lump them into the whole, to the sociological study of these philosophers, even though half of them didn't call themselves philosophers, which I find really funny. And the law of small numbers. It's all very intriguing, and it sort of takes a lot of the mystery out of philosophy, which was sort of a downer in some way, but it's very, very interesting. And it must have
go through that series also when we get to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be interesting. I wouldn't mind following you in that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear Matt's take on it because he could simplify a lot. Because my Derrida class is so difficult.
It was the only 1B I got from Matt. That's how difficult. It's very difficult stuff. I got an A, everything except postmodernism, the 1B, because it's very difficult to get through and get it correctly. I was struggling, and wow, the only one time I got a B. James, how about you?
Well, is there anything else that you didn't cover? That'd be nice to see again.
No, I think we covered everything. Yeah, everything I needed to. Yeah, the thing about the very first sentence that Matt said on the very first day, he said, first of all, they don't even that term postmodernism is itself wrong. None of them call themselves postmodernism.
Right.
That's not the right word. It's post-structuralism.
Right. Yeah, there is.
That's what they are. Yeah,
Post-structuralism.
I mean, you're using the wrong word to begin with.
Right. Right.
He talks a lot about this.
People call them postmodernists because they're no longer, it's part, once the modern era left, which was the mid-century, they started to call anybody from the 50s, late 50s on postmodernist. But then there's the post-structuralists.
Yeah.
And they saw themselves different. And then really, actually, none of them call themselves that.
None of them do. No.
And they all fought with each other for philosophical chair. I mean,
they reject that term.
Chairs in France, in their colleges, their universities. So.
Yeah, they reject that term if they don't say it's outright meaningless. I mean, it's not the correct term to use. Yeah. They're post-structural.
This guy Foucault wasn't even a philosopher at all in any sense. He was a historian.
Right, and I mean, he resonates more with me than any of them, but it was a short period of time, and yeah, but if it wasn't, I would have never got to them. I mean, because they're all in reaction to the continental and the modernists, or the continental philosophers and the ancients. And the ancients, I'm fascinated with all of it. So, and I'm so new at it. I mean, my background is like, I was a East European history major. And then I was a teacher only for, if a nonprofit funded something, I worked there as a program director to help that nonprofit. So, I mean, my background is not philosophy. I have my own philosophies. And then it was only when I moved to Portland and was retired that I started doing the Portland People's Colloquium, which I learned everything from them, from reading all this stuff. So I'm fascinated and have a lot
of respect to that, Audrey. Only working for nonprofits. I think that there's definitely a lot of that the world needs.
Well, thanks for the respect, but it has not paid my bills, and my Social Security is very low because of it. Because everybody thought if you worked for a really good nonprofit, that meant you weren't going to get paid a lot, and therefore your Social Security sucks.
I did. You familiar with City Year?
I'm City Year.
Yeah, from AmeriCorps.
New York. Oh, America.
It's a part of AmeriCorps. They pay you $10,000 a year. Not even enough to live. I mean, that's way below the poverty line. I was 18 when I did that, and I was teaching in just the worst. Yeah, it's impossible to do that.
Well, I did it. I'm 70 years old, and I have enough Social Security to pay my bills and my little condo here in Portland, and but it was mostly in New York, and it was mostly related to gangs and people students that a population that the regular high schools didn't want to work with, and so it was fun. And then, of course, when the World Trade Centers were bombed, then I worked for a group that dealt with the after effects of that, and mostly with Latinos, but or it's called Latinx now, but to do programs like that. And food banks. I've always worked in the food banks, except out here. They wouldn't hire me out here. I guess I was too old.
Well, a lot of respect for you for doing that. Also, thank you, David, for always putting on these meetings. It's just such a nice thing to do. I get so much out of these. I really do. And James, David's wingman, basically.
I'm really glad.
I like to think I'm a cooperative wingman, but yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Hit me up. That's good. Yep.
Really glad to have you here, James. Yeah.
It was a
Well,
great
thank you, David.
discussion, guys. It was nice talking to you all, but I'm off.
Okay.
Yep.
Bye, Audrey.
Thanks.
Glad to have you here. See you next time.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, the star here is Matt and the lectures and the notes, and I hope we're getting as much as we can out of that because it's excellent material, and I'm happy to share them with the world. I'm the only one person who has these recordings, so you're never going to get these anywhere else. Yeah, and there's a lot to go through. If we continue, we'll see if I get through all of them. There's environmental ethics, there's animal ethics, there's a class on this is the existentialism class, but there was contemporary I've got a number of classes to get through. Postmodernism. Yeah. All right.
Just by chance, when you mentioned environmental ethics, have you ever heard of William Edelglass?
No.
Oh, no. Whatever. He was my philosophy professor in college. I lived with him. He was a great guy. I mean, I learned so much from that guy. Just.
Did he write a book, Will?
He hasn't written a book. He was the editor of that the Journal of Environmental Philosophy, and his father wrote plenty of books. So I don't know what his father's first name was, but it was definitely Edelglass' last name.
Be interested in doing a presentation? Would he be?
Me? No. That's your job. I don't know enough about philosophy.
No, Will. Would he be interested?
Oh, maybe. I hope so. I'll contact him. He's a wonderful guy. He's really happy to reach out.
We've done professors to give presentations before. I have contacted Matt, and I mean, he's busy, so I mean, he teaches full time, and he writes books, so no harm, no foul.
William Edelglass, the professor, he should be free. I mean, our college shut down for good, so he's and he didn't want to go to, just like me, he didn't want to go to the college that we quote unquote merged with. No, we didn't really merge, but it was a forced merger kind of thing. And so he's at least taking a leave of absence for like 3 years, I think was the last he said. So he's definitely not the busiest. I'll reach out to him.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we've had professors give presentations before, and we do offer recompense. Mm-hmm.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah, we do.
He's like a communist Buddhist. He wouldn't take it, but he'd be happy that you offered.
But that's happened in the past as well. We've offered the money, but then they don't take it. That's fine too.
Yeah, that's fine. Wonderful. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So the next class will be up and posted with the new notes probably within 24 hours. So keep checking the calendar, and I'll announce it as soon as I post it up. And all right, great session, everyone. And we got still a long way to go. I still don't think we're even halfway through all of the Heidegger section, but we'll get there, and the journey is enjoyable. So good session, everyone. All right, so we'll see you guys. Yeah, next week.
Thanks. See you next week.
Okay, everyone.
Warren, Charlie.
Thanks for being here.